alliances to stand and fight against what was happening on the street. And today, these people are being attacked by members of the Jewish community. I mean, these people are heroes. I don't know, a lot of people aren't aware of how much effort and time some of these people put during 4 years into making sure that our enemies would not get the keys to number 10 because they viewed him as an anti-Semite, both Jew and non-Jew. You know, these people, the Jews are heroes, the non-Jews are righteous Gentiles. Absolutely fantastic crowd. And it's heartbreaking to see even members of the BOD or members of the, journalists within the Jewish Chronicle begin to side with hard left Jewish elements against these people. This is so self-destructive. If we're going to be able to deal with the threats that are coming at us, and the threat is this: Corbyn was a symptom, just a symptom. And Corbynism is a symptom as well. And we knocked back a symptom. We didn't deal with the underlying issues. You know, academia today is entirely corrupt. It's gone, okay? It's gone because so much of it is infected, and the rest of it that isn't infected will defend the infected part under the rights of freedom of speech and freedom of, academia and so on and so forth, which means it's a lost cause. The alliance between the radical left and the Islamists is also all around us. You know, in Sheffield, I did recently a study on Sheffield, and they became the first town council to recognise the state of Palestine. And what a town council in the UK is doing recognising the state of Palestine, anybody's guess. But the reason is this: don't look on it like an unholy event. These things are logical. You know, they're happening because they're logical. This is a spiral of events, of societal forces. If you were sitting around in a council meeting in Sheffield and you want to agree on something, okay, you've got the hard left, you've got the people from the Bangladeshi community, from the Somalian community, from around the table, okay, and they're all perfectly legitimate, democratic, agree on something. There's only one thing these people are ever going to agree on. There's only one cause that they can turn around and say, actually, you know, this is a point we can all agree on, and that's Israel. It's one of the reasons Israel is always or often so high on the agenda. And this is societal pressure that is working against us. And it's coming at us from both sides because they're playing off against each other. What we have is we have the rise of the left and this Marxist, Islamist alliance. And to oppose it, you'll have the rise of the right. You will naturally have the rise of the right. And each of them will feed from each other. And we get trapped in the middle. We've got no friends really on either side. And we're heading down a path where things are only going to get worse. Because as each side takes an action or does something that either brings people into it or sends people off to the other side, you enter a spiral of events that change effectively the face of the society in which we live. The best example, people sometimes say to me, this is like the 1930s. It isn't, not at all. Go back 10 years, 1920s, far more similar, where you have these far left, you have the communist and nationalist forces beginning to play off against each other. And it's far more like that than it is the 1930s, where in Western Europe, or much of it, National Socialism or the fascism had won. And in Eastern Europe, obviously, with Russia, communism had taken over. But here we're in this battle, and each of these sides pose a danger to us. So if we are to face it, what we need is an iron wall defense. We need, and it's an impossible thing to say to Jews, but when you say we need to be united, but we do. We need to be able to bring up an iron wall defense where people within it are ideologically of a similar mind. Doesn't have to be identical, but who are aware of the battles that we need to face, because we need to face some really, really hard battles, and not everybody on our own side is going to be with us. This is the hard part, is we are going to see fracturing in certain elements of the Jewish community. But it's something that we do need to do, because as I said, we're in this spiral, and it's not going to go away. The situation is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I don't know exactly what the time is. Someone let me know. Have I gone over the 35, 40 minutes?
I think you're
Anyone
all right
there?
for another few minutes.
Okay.
Maybe 10 minutes. I know owing to difficult circumstances, we started a few minutes late. So 10 minutes maybe, and then we'll take questions.
Okay. I'll give a couple of examples. One of my earliest actions publicly was over the conferences in the universities, firstly in Southampton, which we managed to defer. I say defer because we stopped it in Southampton. It eventually took place in Cork a couple of years later. I went to that. And a few months later, there was an event in Exeter. Now, the Exeter event was run by Pape. Ilan Pape is a ex-Israeli anti-Zionist Marxist who spins lies. He's a conspiracy theorist. He spins lies, and is probably the most well hated the ethnic cleansing issue. Not because he invented it, he didn't, but because what they need when they put these things forward is they need the Jews to be able to legitimize it for them. So whilst other academics may have used the ethnic cleansing argument before Pape, Pape was the one who came along and said, hey, I'm Israeli, I'm a Jew, it's ethnic cleansing. If you need someone to turn up on TV, if you need someone to speak in an event, if you need someone to legitimize this argument for you, I'm going to do it. And at the time, the JLC was still of the mind, the Jewish Leadership Council was still of the mind that we could negotiate with these people, okay? So what they'd done is they sent 2 academics down to take part in this anti-Zionist conference. And I said at the time, this is nuts. You cannot negotiate with these people. These people want us gone. Either from a national perspective, as in they want the eradication of the state of Israel, or from a religious perspective where they consider religions obsolete. And what they did is they tried to, effectively at the time I got annoyed, they tried to con us. They sent these 2 academics down, and the report that came back was excellent. They said, yes, we were there. Yes, we participated. Yes, we managed to ask our questions. Yes, we did all this. We had a major impact. There was one little problem that they had. They didn't know me at the time, and they didn't know I was there. So I saw what actually happened. And what happened was they were left in the audience. Remember, this was a JLC official announcement. They were left in the audience. And at the end of every session, they were allowed, like any other guest, to ask a question like any other guest. And this issue of I mean, this was almost, I mean, it was awful. I wrote about it. I had a major, major to do with the JLC over it. But this type of issue where we're not actually on the same page, where we don't fully understand the enemy that we face, that we naively believe that there's something to talk about with them. This is the most basic issue that we really have to get to grips with. It is that this is black and white here. There's no negotiating with anti-Zionism. We can stand there and we can talk to Zionists or soft Zionists, if you like, and that's fine. No trouble there at all. Criticism of Israel is not anti-Zionism. Israel is a democracy. There is plenty of space around an Israeli dinner table for serious debate about the issues in Israel. You only have to look at what's taking place on the streets of Israel at the moment to know that Israel is an open, free, vibrant democracy that's got quite a toxic left itself. And that's all okay. When you cross into anti-Zionism, you're on a completely different battlefield. And these people, they're the enemy. You know, they're the people that go, they go to Parliament Square and they say prayers or Kaddish for Hamas terrorists. And the blurring of the lines, this important element, the blurring of the lines is what is important to them. What they want to do is they want to smokescreen and blur lines so nobody can tell the difference anymore between what's on one side of the fence and what's on the other, effectively the iron wall. So if you look today between groups like Yachad, who are officially a Zionist group, Na'amod, which is officially an ambiguous group, and the Judases, who are the anti-Zionists, over to JBL, who are hardcore anti-Zionists, they're all holding hands somewhere, which means we have an issue that which side are people on here? We need to be able to know that, you know, if you're Zionist, if you believe in the state of Israel, you've got no place talking to someone that doesn't. None. Because those people, whether you like it or not, are holding hands with enemies. They may not be doing it themselves. You know, when you stand alongside someone who says, well, he's okay, he's just a little bit of an anti-Zionist, he's okay, but who's he holding hands with? Because everybody's holding hands with somebody. And this issue of building an iron wall around our own communities to protect us, because there is a, you know, I don't like to go into terminologies that make it sound like we're dealing with enemies when we're dealing with Jewish people who are actually good people. And drawing the lines, it's sometimes difficult. I say this, that I believe the definition should be like this. If somebody would make a good Israeli, they're okay. And many, for example, of Yachad's supporters, as much as I don't like Yachad, many of Yachad's supporters would be welcome additions to Israeli society. There'd be nothing wrong with having them in Israel. They'd be great. You know, so they'd vote left of centre. It doesn't matter. Lots of people in Israel vote left of centre. There'd be good, healthy additions to the country here. If you move over towards the anti-Zionists, people who push, for example, BDS, you're in a completely different ballgame. Those people would not be welcome additions to the state of Israel. And by the time you get over to JBL, you'd be talking about people who would actually rather be having dinner with Hamas than having dinner with any Israelis. And what they need to be careful of, and something we need to really impress on them as Zionists, we need to start pushing for clarification on the left of where those lines actually are. Because I shouldn't be having a discussion with, for example, Hannah Weisfeld from Yachad. I shouldn't be having an argument with her over a legitimate Israeli issue and have her aligning with people who are anti-Zionists against me. These people need to make up their minds. They really do. And I think that moving forward, it is something that we need to start looking at closely, certainly with the affiliations of groups like the BOD, about who gets in the door and who doesn't. Because if we do not put an iron wall around our community, tell you this, in 50 years it won't exist. 50 years from now, there'll be a growing orthodoxy, fine. There'll be tiny parts of secular Jewry spread around, but it will look nothing like it does today. We will disintegrate from the inside. And that's all I've got for you for today. So questions,
Right.
anybody?
Okay. Well, the way we're going to do it is that in order to manage this with a large number of people, I've muted everybody and asked people to put questions on chat, and I also got some questions in advance. So what I'm going to do is I'll put the questions, but I'll put the questions that various people have submitted, and in strict first come first serve principles, I'll take the ones who've asked them in advance. Okay, and this one is from Jill, who says, on anti-Israel social media, there is a constant stream, hourly, of videos and images taken from Middle Eastern Monitor, Gaza Press, and so on. We know the sources are unreliable, but we can't disprove every assertion. An example is the monthly headline, settler deliberately runs over / kills 7 or 8 year old boy or girl in Hebron / Bethlehem, etc. These posts are treated as gospel truth in Corbynist Facebook forums where they appear, whereas anything about Uyghurs, say, is called Western propaganda by the same people. There are regular posts about Israel destroying Palestinian clinics for the treatment of COVID. How should one answer, if at all? Should we answer those kinds of accusations, or will we be just running around chasing our tails?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I'll get to it in 1 second. I just want to answer. Jonathan Hoffman just asked me a question, actually, why am I coming home? Which I think is probably the best question I could possibly ask. I don't know, but I'm coming anyway. Right, Jill, look, the situation in social media is worse than anyone believes it to be. Worse, not better, not the same, but worse. I spend years in anti-Israel activist forums. And what's happening, and this is part of the societal drive that's taking place, is everybody, we included, are creating bubbles around ourselves, echo chambers. Now, for us, if we're moderates, and I assume most people here are moderates, the echo chamber is not actually that bad a thing. So we'll still have access to the Beeb now and again, or the Telegraph, the Mail gets in, but most of our media sources are still actively visible to us. So we're still engaging with mainstream. So it's not too bad. But for example, Palestine Live. Now, I lived Palestine Live for 3 years. If I open my sock account in the morning, I don't see any mainstream media at all. Nothing. The Guardian's not there. The Guardian's too extreme for them. There's nothing. Even the Indie is considered right-wing Zionist propaganda material. All they see is hard left, alt or alt-right, and it's both the same thing. They think it's a hard left newspaper they're reading. They're actually reading some white supremacist website from the southern United States. All conspiracy junk. And they're not getting anything in the other way at all. So what they read all day, every day, is how many of these children that we've run over in Jerusalem, or how many people the settlers run over in Hebron, or how many orchards have been set fire to today, all day, every day. So they add it together. They don't think, oh, I'm looking at a video from 2014. Oh, this is another one, and another one, and another. Well, there's been 35 children run over today in Jerusalem alone. So what else is happening in places where we don't know? The genocide argument forms. And then they turn off Facebook, and they turn on the TV, and they look at BBC, and they look at Sky News, and there's nothing. How can it possibly be that Israel is committing genocide. And they know Israel's committing genocide because all of their favorite people have told them it is. And nobody's talking about it. And this gives fruit to the Zionists control the media. It's a self-fulfilling conspiracy theory. And coming from that point, you can't do anything to change their minds. Nothing. Okay? There are some things that we can argue about, we should, and there are some things we shouldn't. Now, I'll say this, if you're talking to someone who believes that engaging him over, let's say, the expansion of Ma'ale Adunim, he thinks Tel Aviv's a settlement, and you're going to argue with him over if you didn't exist. Why engage with him about where the border is in whether it should be the 1967 border or not? In other words, choose who you talk to, who you argue with, and what you argue about. I tend to consider a lot of things rabbit holes. You know, our fight, the fight that's taking place, is an existential battle over the state of Israel. Should Israel have the right to exist or not? Israel exists. It's not actually a real thing taking place. It's an argument for us in the UK or in the US or wherever we are. This is a battle about, as I said earlier, British Jews, the diaspora. And it's a battle for our existence, not Israel's. So you're you're discussing with an anti-Zionist, stick to anti-Zionist topics. That's your strong point. You know, their weaknesses are pre-1949. Their strengths are post-1967. And what they will continually try to do is keep the argument post-1967 because it's their strong turf. Everyone wants to be able to hold up a picture of a dead baby and say, explain that, and leave you with the problem. Everybody wants that. So take the argument back when you're dealing with anti-Zionists, or don't engage them at all. There's no point engaging an anti-Zionist with post-1967 politics. With regards to the issues of the media, you know, the Middle East Monitor, the Electronic Intifada, and all of these, look, there's not much we can do. We're outnumbered. We are outnumbered. Let's accept that. Okay, we are, what, 15 million of us on the planet today, and we've got allies. We've got, in America, obviously they have the strong Christian ally presence over there, far stronger than we have over here. In Europe, we are outnumbered. We're in trouble on a PR scale. I think it's about selecting the battles, because if you are outnumbered, okay, and if you start, give you this example. I see people on Twitter, right? This is a classic example. I see people on Twitter, and I see some guy, and he's got good knowledge of Israel. He's a solid Zionist, great knowledge of Israel, great knowledge of the history, and he's arguing with someone on Twitter, right? And I'm following the argument down, and it's taking hours and hours and hours and hours. And I look at who he's arguing with, and the person's got 17 followers. Why? Why bother? Why waste your time?
Can I
go on?
Interject?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, so maybe, I mean, because we have to move on to other questions,
Yeah.
David.
Yes.
Thanks for that. I was going to say maybe the solution is to only bother to argue if there are neutral people there who may be convinced, but it's no good trying to argue with the hardliners.
Can I just add just one tiny thing to that, and I get time is an issue. When you do that, don't argue with the person. You're absolutely right. It's the way I do it all the time. Argue as if, look at him when you're talking to him, but argue as if you're actually talking to those people on the side, because they're the important ones. You're absolutely right. Go on.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Okay, the next question. And I think you've probably touched on this already. There's been a rising tide of anti-Semitism in UK universities in recent years. Invariably, this goes unchallenged, with those responsible acting with apparent impunity. This is documented at, for instance, Sheffield University. What steps can be taken to both stop this and hold those responsible to account?
The only way we're going to be able to deal with this, and it's not a problem, I view it as the biggest problem. Okay, I think it's the biggest one we have. Ever since the 2000 UN conference, there's been a definite strategic attempt by anti-Israel activism to academically legitimize that argument through pushing, academic studies, post-colonial studies, gender studies, whatever studies they've got, they use for anti-Israel activism. I think it's the biggest problem we have, but I don't think we're necessarily alone. I think that the West as a whole is under threat, and I think we should try and use alliances. Again, if the Jews are standing alone, we're lost. We really are. Certainly over in the UK, or not in Israel, but in the UK, we need to be thinking about alliances. We need to be turning to the government for help and for protection. We need laws, basically, to be able, because you won't be able to do anything about it. The academics are there. They're protected by academic freedom. In other words, even if you've got a really, really nice Zionist dean sitting somewhere, he won't touch his academics because of academic freedom. The best example of that is Warwick. Look at Warwick. Warwick actually have an anti-Zionist camp within academia. And this one is unbelievable, that there was a PALSOC and an ISOC, Israeli Society and a Palestinian Society, that were getting on. Okay, they were actually holding joint events. It so annoyed the academic activists at Warwick that they set up their own Palestinian society. So Warwick had two Palestinian societies, one set up by the academics because the actual student one wasn't extreme enough. So you're not going to be able to do anything about that just by standing up or complaining. It's actually going to need a real people to sit down, a think tank. You're going to need MPs and the government and so on to try to break down the barriers of what's taken place in academia over the last 2 or 3 decades.
Okay, thanks very much. Actually, your mentioning of the government brings me very neatly to my next question, which is the first one that's on the chat this evening, and that's from Jonathan. And the question is, Lord John Mann is the government's advisor on anti-Semitism. Are you aware of anything he's done in this capacity? Because Jonathan isn't. Okay. No. I know John from before, and I know a lot he did before, but I can't give you anything he has done since his appointment. Okay. Okay. Right. The next one is from Rosalind. Now, this is more of a personal question, and she actually sent me a chat privately to ask whether it was okay to ask you, and I thought it was. I thought I'd better see it. But,
ask away.
Yeah, she says, I hope you don't mind me asking, but how do years of negativity dealing with this anti-Jewish and anti-Israel hatred and putting yourself into horrific situations with people with whom you would not choose to mix, and I think I was putting it mildly, affect your psyche and your health? I
don't know.
You can choose not to answer that.
No, it's not. I choose not to ask. I honestly don't know. I can say this. When I obviously I have very, very thick skin. I mean, that's obvious. I wouldn't be able to do what I do if I didn't have very, very thick skin and a lot of tolerance to be able to sit there and talk to these people. I mean, some of the conversations I've had are truly horrific. But the only times I ever really feel it is after a report, because when I'm preparing a report, I become one of them. Just going over these things and trying to build. When I write a report, I can't just say, "Oh, this person is this," and I have to build it like an academic study. In fact, I have to try to present it like an argument. So I have to give them at least the credit of sanity, of being sanity. And when I come out of those, I tend to need a few weeks. You know, it's swimming in toxic sewers. And I can do it for a few hours, and then I come out, you know, I go into the pro-Israeli chat rooms and groups, and I talk to friends and that, and it's like a cleanse. But when I do the reports, when I really get lost in them, yeah, it's very difficult, really difficult. I come out, and it's taken me weeks and weeks before. So yeah, that's the answer.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I'm actually going to take a chairman's privilege now and ask a question of my own before I move on to the others. And I think something very disturbing has happened this year. It reminds me of the strap line of Jaws 2, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. But we've known for some time that there is an unholy alliance of the radical right, the radical left, and the Islamists over anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. This year, they seem to have been joined with a new ally, which is Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And so that we have a fourth, I would say, potentially or actually violent and probably totalitarian movement, which is joining the other three, and that is really a worrying development. Do you know anything about Black Lives Matter and where they're coming from and how dangerous they are?
Well, I think we should be wary of calling it a movement, because in some ways it's like BDS. It's not identical. It's some similarity. BDS, it's not a movement as such. It doesn't really hedge. You can cut off. Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to give any names other than, you know, I think that some of the people involved in the forming of the movement itself, as in the artificial head of the snake in the UK, are already known to us. And I don't think we'd be surprised if we saw a list of those names. And it's unfortunate, but it's unsurprising that politically active, hardcore members of the Black community have started this movement. And you know, if we only go back a few years to the UJ, the union, the student union with Bouattia, and the trouble we had with her, and she was at the time part of other groups as well that were also hardcore anti-Zionist, anti-West, anti-capitalist, basically anarchists. I don't think we should be surprised when we finally see the names of, or we will be surprised when we finally see the names of the people at the top. I think we'll know them. I think we'll recognize them. I think we've seen them all before. It's extremely disturbing in that there's justification in the cause. You know, forget the anti-capitalist, anti-Western. You know, we have a cause with real justification, and these people have basically taken it and perverted it. But that's what the hard left do. They always do it. They've done the same. In some ways, they've done the same with, you know, the Palestinian issue and or the Arab issue, if you don't want to call them Palestinians. There is also a case there. I'm really pro-Israeli. I'm a solid Zionist. I'm right of center. But there is a case. You know, these people are living in a situation that we don't, as Zionists, we don't want them to be living in. Okay, as Zionists, we do not want to be in this perpetual situation. We would love to be able to free of it, but we can't. We can't, because people have taken a legitimate cause on the other side, a legitimate argument, and they've radicalized it. And this is exactly what's taking place with BLM. The only thing I will take exception to, this hard right and hard left thing, it really is, I'm really uncomfortable with it. In some ways, certainly in the UK, the right wing have been neutered as an enemy for us. Not the hard right, which you were talking about, but with the hard left, there's that the reason they're the biggest threat to us is because elements of the right wing no longer consider us the same as they did 100 years ago. We now have a home. We now have a nation. And in some ways, the moderate right has been neutered from the disease of anti-Semitism. And it's important to understand and to differentiate between, or the difference that makes to right-wing anti-Semitism. It's why the right-wing anti-Semitism, if you want to call it right-wing, is really small factions at the very, very extreme of politics. And on the left, they almost took the keys of number 10. That difference is the difference the state of Israel has made on the political spectrum. But yeah, absolutely, BLM. It's a really worrying addition, more so because there's a legitimate cause behind it.
Okay, thanks for that. And the next question is from Sarah, who says, David, you mentioned B'Tselem. They and similar groups or individuals like Gideon Levy, etc., actually living in Israel, seem to have almost suicidal anti-Israel views, which surely would directly harm them and their loved ones if they got what they espouse. Much more than diaspora Jews with such views. Do you have any thoughts about this and where they're coming from?
Yeah, look, the one thing we should understand is whenever we have surveys of Zionist thought, and by Zionist thought, I don't mean someone who self-defines as a Zionist. I mean someone who identifies with the basic concepts of Zionism. In the UK, we're looking at something like 93%, I think, of Jews. In Israel, there were elections, far too many elections, as it happens. And we can see the way that Israeli people vote. And we know that Jewish Israelis vote for Zionist parties. So bad is the situation on the left of the spectrum, where post-Oslo, the left wing, I mean, they lost it. The collapse of Oslo process with the Intifada, the peace camp in Israel collapsed, okay, completely collapsed. And over the last 2 decades, it's just got smaller and smaller and smaller. And at the most recent election, Meretz, which used to be able to pull 7 or 8 seats on its own, and the Labour Party, which used to, 20, 30 seats on its own, are now joining together so they actually manage to pass the threshold. It's minuscule. Why is this important in answering your question? It's important because these people are insignificant, okay? They're of no number. They're like the Jews in the UK. Now, I'm going to use the Jews in the UK to answer your question. We all know that JBL, Free Speech on Israel, Jews for Boycotting Israeli Goods, all of these groups, they're all the same people, right? They're all the 7 or 8 same people creating 425,000 different groups to make themselves look more important than they are. How do they get on the BBC? How is it that they're always, or the Guardian will print their letters, or the India will give them articles? And the reason is because we have enemies. Gideon Levy is a nobody, okay? Haaretz shouldn't even be published anymore in English. The only people who read Haaretz are people who hate Israel. So what's holding Haaretz afloat, what's giving Gideon Levy a name, is not the fact that he's got a legitimate argument. It's not the fact that what he has to say is important, but the fact that we have a lot of people who hate us that are willing to listen to him. And the sad fact is, every society, every nation has its extremists. There are probably more people walking around the United Kingdom who believe they were abducted by aliens than there are people like Gideon Levy in Israel. And yet, obviously, because people are willing to give him the platform, I mean, look at Max Blumenthal and Mikko Peled. They're treated like rock stars. These people are nothing, they're nobodies, they're freaks and conspiracy theorists who hate Israel and hate Zionism, and they've got lost, basically. I don't know whether it's daddy issues or whatever it is, but they're rock stars because they can sell books and they can fill auditoriums because we have haters. So focus on the haters. That's the only reason that Gideon Levy exists, and you know his name.
Is part of the problem there that in a globalized world, Israel is a very, very small home market, so that people like Gideon Levy can reach far, far more people by appealing to people outside of Israel. I mean, this is the case with Haaretz. I mean, they almost may not care whether anybody in Israel reads it, because Israel is such a tiny market, whereas Europe and the US is a huge market.
To a degree. We've also got the problem that this is obviously the social media issue. You know, social media works against us. If I was to write an article today and I was to be very moderate in the way I wrote the article, you know, I was trying to be understanding towards the Arab cause and understanding towards the refugees and try to seek a moderate solution, I'd get no shares, okay? Because the Zionists would turn around and say, well, I'm not liking that. I'm not sharing that. And the people on the other side, well, he's a Zionist, not having anything to do with it. So I'd be like, somebody who is actually trying to place a moderate voice doesn't get anything. The more extreme and provocative you make your article, the more likely you are to make noise. And the more shares you get, the more Facebook are going to show it to other people. If you look back over the last, I mean, two decades ago, Gideon Levy would never have written some of the stuff that he's writing today. You know, I saw him in the UK, I think about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and he was shifting then between the two states. He was still kind of, but you know, he's more and more extreme. It's this bubble effect that's I actually believe that only in a couple of decades are we really going to understand how much damage social media is doing to us as a society. And I mean that globally. I don't just mean that from Israel and the Jews. It's radicalizing people. And the social media algorithms which are responsible for this problem of Haaretz are making things worse.
Okay, thanks very much. Move on to another subject. This is from Richard, who says, hi, how much do you think the governmental disaster happening in Israel at the present moment is going to negatively impact the anti-Semitism in Israel activity and anti-Israel activity in the West?
I mean, define governmental disaster.
Well, I assume he's talking about the instability and, you know,
well,
cabinet crises.
That would, in some ways, I automatically reject it in the sense that, well, are you now blaming Israel for anti-Semitism, which is something we should automatically reject? Look, there is obviously cause and effect. Okay, I mean, anti-Semitism spiked in 2014 because of the Gaza crisis. So there is actually, we can't completely deny that activity in Israel has repercussions. But the growth of Corbynism had nothing to do with it. So when we see a massive spike, it is virtually. Anti-Israel activists want to talk about Israel all the time. Anti-Semites want to talk about Israel all the time. Israel is the global Jew. Anti-Semitism shifted. It's evolved. Anybody who doesn't get that shouldn't be dealing in discussions about anti-Semitism at all. Anybody who does not understand anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, they may not be identical, but they're certainly Siamese twins. So, yeah, look, a strong government, then you could argue maybe it would be quieter. But if there wasn't a governmental crisis and if Bibi was stronger, would they have already gone ahead with, you know, reasserting sovereignty, and in that case would have provided them with fodder anyway. So I don't think you can win, because I think they're just going to talk about us anyway.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks for that. Now, the only way I'm going to depart from strict order is that I'm actually going to pass over people who've had one question already, for the sake of allowing as many people as possible to participate. So the next question is from S. Sinclair, is, thank you for everything you do. You say you believe things will get worse before they get better. What's your prediction on what worse looks like? I think we can probably depress ourselves enormously here with this one.
All right, firstly, when I go and do talks, when I actually go and do talks, that I, you know, get invited to places to do talks, I've started to begin with an apology because I tend to depress people with with my messages. I'm not, you know, so, but yeah, okay. Let's say it will get better. What does worse look like? Look, I don't know. I'll say this, you know, and this isn't, it's actually a message that holds, responds more to just this question. We're a tiny people, okay? We are a tiny people, and Israel is a tiny state, and the world is quite a big place, and we're dealing with societal forces. We're dealing with other problems within society. So we're dealing with major issues. Now, let's say it's 1913 and we're having a chat, and somebody asks me the question, what do you think the world will look like in 6 years? Who knows? You know, and it doesn't really matter when you pick up that point, whether it's the late 1920s or the 1930s or the 1940s, before the Cold War, you know, or before the Korean War, or Vietnam, wherever you pick up the point, it's very difficult to see where the world is heading. And I think we're at the start of seismic shifts. What they'll be, how they'll look, I really can't say. What I do believe is I believe that Europe is heading for massive internal strife, civilian strife. I just can't see any way around it. And I'd be very surprised if in the next couple of decades we don't see major civil trouble here. It's depressing. I do believe it will get better eventually, and I believe Israel will be fine. I mean, this is my one thing here, is that I actually think that the future for Israel is quite good, quite strong, and I think we should, as Zionists, I think that should be the rock upon which we certainly place a lot of our hopes.
Okay, thanks for that. The next question is from Coral. How do we protect naive university students against the anti-Semitic machinations of the like of Garda Kami at Exeter or SOAS, etc.?
I don't know. This is, if you look at, I think it's David Miller, the issue we've recently had with the Bristol professor, who was expelled from the Labour Party, and he's come up with all this nonsense recently, this anti-Semitism. Now, Miller, I've been after for a long time. Now, he was at Bath, and he was supervising a student, can't remember her name now, can't remember her, but massive anti-Israel activist, supervising her PhD. Now, Garda Kami, teaching a student may be one thing, and it may be, okay, how do we protect? My bigger question will be, well, what about all the PhD candidates she's supervising? How many PhD candidates has Ilan Pappé supervised? All of these academic activists out there, like Miller, are supervising PhD candidates who go on then to be professors at other universities. This is a, it's a growing problem. Yeah, Hilary Ackett, thank you, Jonathan. So how do we protect them? Now, if you're talking about our Jewish youth, the one thing we need to do is keep them out of the hands of Yachad. And in some ways, Yachad is a problem of our own making, because we don't necessarily provide our children with the backing and the enough knowledge to be able to handle it. And when I say knowledge, I don't mean myths. It's very easy to stand there and tell a student, like to tell a Jewish child, yes, this is what happened in 1948. There was no Arabs were kicked out of their homes, they all ran away, and this happened. And we can paint a very, very virginal birth picture of the state of Israel, and we can make the situation in the territories look absolutely wonderful, but it's not. It really isn't, and no Israeli thinks it is. And if you don't protect your children by providing them with the truth, then the first time they come across someone that proves to them that what you said isn't true, it becomes A lied to me, therefore B is telling me the truth, and they get dragged into it. And you know, we should have a pro-Zionist group on the left that is pro-Zionist, and instead we've basically given the floor this what's the best word for them? AstroTurf group called, you know, new Israeli funded group called Yachad, that's asking questions that some of our children are listening to, and they get dragged off. You look at Yachad's class of 2015, half of them are anti-Zionist today, or maybe almost half of them. It's a school of anti-Zionism. They're holding hands with anti-Zionists, and yet they're in our schools. They're in our Jewish schools. You know, they're ones that are active in our universities, and keep them on karma is maybe okay, but we need to be able to provide them with a solid Zionist education and strong enough information to be able to absorb the criticisms. We need to be able to produce youth that are knowledgeable enough to accept that Israel is not perfect, you know, and doesn't have to be perfect. No state's perfect. It just has a right. It's a state. It's our state, and you know, this is where we are, and this is what it is. So I think education, absolutely education.
Okay, thanks very much for that, David. Well, we're getting towards 7:20 now. I think we probably need to wind up now. Thanks to all those who asked questions. Thanks to all who've come. And deepest apologies for those who didn't get their questions asked. I mean, can I say to those people that if they would like to email North London Friends of Israel with any questions that didn't get taken, we'll pass them on to you?
Absolutely. Look, as I said in the beginning, I love taking the questions are more important and better for me than just speaking in the beginning. Either email you, or like I said, my website is david-collier.com. There's a contact me button on there. Just feel free to ask questions. Really, anything you want. They don't have to be nice. You know, I'm used to hostile questions. You can have a go.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that, David. What I want to do now is to put some details up. First, I'm going to share screen. Now, first, as I said at the beginning, we very much hope to get back to our normal activities in North London Friends of Israel as soon as possible. We very much hope that as many of you as possible will feel able to get involved. So especially if you live in or around the North London area, please get in touch, and our contact details, you should be seeing those on the screen. Our email address, our website, which has a contact us page, and also our social media. We send out an email usually once a week, giving details of our activities, so please get involved. Get on our mailing list and find out how you can help the cause. It only remains for me to say, David, thanks so much for joining us this evening. I think we'll apologize to all of the participants for the confusion at the beginning, but I'm sure you'll all agree it was a very worthwhile evening. So thanks for doing that. And thanks to all of you for your time and contributions. Thank you, and bye. Good night.